And as I announced, we're having a change in speakers today, but we are lucky enough to have Michael Sable with us today to speak on our topic. Michael Sable currently serves as the Assistant City Manager for the City of Bloomington and has over 20 years of experience in local government. He serves on the Executive Board of International City Managers Association and holds a BA in Political Science from Augsburg College and an MBA from the University of St. Thomas. And with that, thanks, Michael, for being here. And I said, good, I'm not the only person that's filling in for somebody else today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Is there a clicker?
Right in the corner.
Look at that. You guys are perfect. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much. I am not Jamie Verbrugge, and that's good and bad, right? I have a little bit more hair, but a little bit less experience, and so maybe the world will balance itself out. I asked if I could make that joke, and Jamie said it was just fine, so I appreciate that. I am here today to talk about Bloomington Forward, which is a local option sales tax. It's being considered and being put forward before voters to talk about making investments in the community in Bloomington, and particularly these three projects. One of them is the Community Health and Wellness Center, which would be a replacement for the Public Health Building and the Creekside Community Center. Both of those buildings, if you've been in them or been by them, are over 60 years old. They're sort of designed for a previous era and don't really bring quality of life that you would expect of a city facility like that. The second one is the renovation of the Bloomington Ice Garden, and there's a lot of detail in that, and which I will get into later about the Bloomington Ice Garden. But I will note, right, if you have ever played hockey or know a hockey player, odds are they have played in that arena many, many times, including the famous 1980 Olympic hockey team did most of their practices midway through that, and so that facility is famous and popular. And the other one then is an enhancement to the 9 Mile Creek Corridor project, which is snakes through the city of Bloomington. Really, among our 97 parks and community assets, it's one of the ones that have been, I think, most overgrown with invasive species and is just in dire need of some management of the infrastructure on there. And so what we have put forward is a $159 million investment plan in these three facilities. The other side is for it. Timing was great on that one. I had to say something. But one of the things that we know is that the needs of the community are evolving over time, and it's just changing. And so if you don't have continued and sustained investment in these pieces of infrastructure, they decline over time. And so what we have is this point where it's time now for a full renovation for these new amenities. I moved this over. I apologize. So really what this project did is the legislature authorized the city to place a referendum question on a 0.5% sales tax, or 0.05, or half a penny on $100. Sorry, 0.5%. And what this would do is this would be a ballot question that would be on the ballot in November 7th, and it would really generate up to $155 million in money that could be spent on these projects. The state has also authorized $4 million in bonding money. It's a state bonding request for pre-design work at the Ice Garden and the Community Health and Wellness Center. So it's really two pots of money totaling $159 million. And the Bloomington residents will play a really critical role in that you will have the final say of yes or no, right? So it's a referendum question with do you support it or not? So it really is going to be up to the voters. I think one of the questions that we often get is, why do this work now? First and foremost, right, every time you delay a project, it gets a little bit more expensive. If you've ever done a kitchen project and you get a bid and you don't like it and you wait 5 more years, it's magically going to be higher. So sometimes there's an opportunity to make these investments. I think for Bloomington Ice Garden, there's really two things. Number one, they stopped manufacturing in the United States the refrigerant. So we use maybe not as good of an applause line as the last one, but I still felt like I should pause. But It's more commonly, and if you've ever heard the term freon, it's a ozone depleting chemical. It's often, we call it R22 because that's the technical name for it. They don't manufacture that in the United States, and so you have to buy it on the secondary market. And we know that price of that ingredient and that chemical is going up and up and up, and the supply is going down and down and down. So you can recycle it, but you can't manufacture new in the United States. And so it's something that we actually have to fundamentally replace from the beginning, and so not use that anymore, go to a more modern refrigeration system. And also, the building is, I think the first rink was built in 1970, roofs need replacement. If you think about your own house, this is a time for a replacement. The other thing, the Creekside Community Wellness and the Public Health Building are really both obsolete. If you've never been to either of those, I would encourage you just to walk through. I think you'd know instantly that it's time for a refresh of those buildings. They're low ceiling heights. In fact, one of them still has, it was an old elementary school that still has the fans hooked up to the wall, and that was what was used to circulate air. Really kind of a throwback to the early 60s. And I think the other part that is the 9 Mile Creek Corridor, as I shared earlier, really this is an opportunity to showcase all of the green space amenities that we have. There's two other things that I'll note. Bloomington grew by 8% in the last decade and is on pace to get to another 10% in the next decade. So we are very quickly going to approach 100,000 people in the community, potentially as soon as 2029. So it's fast growing. There's you can see the cranes and the housing that's going up in the community, and so the need and the demand for more is going to only increase. So I did want to talk a little bit about the Creekside Community Center and the Bloomington Health Building. Both of these facilities are over 60 years old, much like this club, right? There's a lot of old amenities and things that are probably stored in someone's garage. But at 60 years old, you do need that influx of investment, and so there's out-of-date electrical and HVAC. Also some of the working spaces in public health, when they often meet young mothers and provide counseling around nutrition for their infants. It's not a space that's very welcoming for the new residents, and so as people are learning how to care for children, right, it's not a space that's very accommodating for them. Also, it's not ADA compliant, right? It's very difficult to maneuver in and out of the building, and the evolving needs are there and changing, and so we've also seen changes in recreational needs. Has anybody heard of pickleball? 10 years ago, the answer was no one, and now everyone. And so it's one of these things that recreation is continuing to evolve, and the ability to do that, to meet those changing demands is real. And as I said, the population has been increasing. One of the challenges the Bloomington Ice Garden faces is its popularity. Normally, we rent 9,000 hours of ice. Now, through good rink management, we're over 10,000 hours this calendar year. We think we're going to beat 10,000 hours of time. We host 24 tournaments annually, and it is standing room only. If you've ever been to a high school hockey game, particularly around playoff time, that place is full. People are parking at Normandale Community College and walking over because it's so full. It is also a 50-year-old building. As I shared, the roof does need replacement. It's outdated. The other thing I'll note is the Rink 3 is an Olympic-sized sheet of ice, so it's bigger than a typical rink that you would see in the National Hockey League. And so the proposal would be to shrink that down so you would have 3 traditional-sized rinks rather than the Olympic size. It's just a shift in the way people play hockey. And the University of Minnesota is also doing that at Mariucci. They're shrinking from an Olympic to a regular size. The 9 Mile Creek Corridor one is a really innovative approach to a project, and this is not, no city has tried this before, but it's to make a really strong and purposeful investment in the environment. And this is one of the funding mechanisms that's being proposed. We know that through our park system master plan, people want more playgrounds, they want more gathering spaces, they want more restrooms. They also have this, natural resources are threatened by invasive species. If you've ever been part of a buckthorn removal, you know that even when you tear it out, it still comes back, and it won't end. And so there is an opportunity for the city to make some sustained investments in invasive species removal. And also, if you've walked along the trail, sometimes you can't even see the creek. You can hear it, but you can't quite see it because of the overgrown natural resources. And so actively managing that, making that a draw and an amenity for people who can use it is an important part. And that project is about $20 million. I apologize. I'm going to pause every time because I just kind of smile. I should throw $1 in the hat just for the clapping. I want to talk a little bit about the Community Health and Wellness Center. This would be located at the Creekside location, roughly Penn and 98th. And it would be a full replacement of the building. So right now, that site it is a very large space. There's a lot of green space fields behind it. And it would be proposed to be built on that site, and it would probably be roughly 3 times the size of the current facility. The total estimated cost of this project is $101 million. And as I said, this is great. The city has already received $1.8 million in money to do some planning and design. And as I shared, this would be a central gathering place for people in Bloomington. It would likely have some opportunities for senior programming spaces, some fitness studios, walking and jogging track, multi-purpose room for activities, a pool with family locker rooms, and then also home to public health. So there'd be public health programming spaces. You'd have access to clinics. That staff would then be located there, so it would almost serve as a one-stop shop for families to get some services, to participate in some activities, and be engaged. And this is really, there's been a lot of work done on engagement previously on the community center, and so this was, I think, a really neat opportunity. And if you've been to, and there's a lot of cities around that have created these, Richfield is currently building one at 70th and Nicollet. The more popular ones you see in Woodbury and in Plymouth and in Maple Grove. They have these really large community gathering centers, these community centers that become sort of a central point for people to come. The other one is, like, as I shared, the Bloomington Ice Garden, and this is a $37.2 million project. This is largely infrastructure pieces, so it is replacing all of the mechanical refrigeration systems, also providing some access to, and the superintendent just left, but I was going to say, locker rooms for Jefferson and Kennedy. The ability, if you've ever been there, 2 teams would dress in a room about this size. Very small, very cramped. Also, if you've ever been around kids who play hockey, it's also very smelly. So getting airflow systems to pull out some of those odors, I think, are really, we would have those things, renovated locker rooms. Again, ADA accessibility, this was a building built when that wasn't a consideration. And so very narrow corridors. In fact, there's only one ADA ramp to go be a viewer so if you want to watch a game, there's only one spot for you to go. And you cannot get to the second level because there aren't functioning elevators in the rink to serve you. So people who have mobility issues would really be improved. We'd also have the opportunity to do additional seating, which is a very high demand piece. And then the last one, a little bit more detail, is on the 9 Mile Creek Corridor project. This includes trails, outdoor amenities, and habitat protection. You know, I've mentioned accessibility a couple of times because if you are in a wheelchair or you don't have the ability to move very easily, it's hard to navigate trails that aren't paved. And so one of the things that we know is that this trail and this amenity are often closed off to people who have mobility issues, but providing access to it so people can experience nature. And so what we would propose is 12,000 feet of new trails, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually a really robust piece. It would also make the trails a little bit wider, so it's more accommodating for walkers. There would be a boardwalk connecting to the Minnesota River bottoms, and then also the bridges across. If you've walked that recently, the bridges are just a little bit out of date, need modernizing and increasing. There'd also be a new playground, so kids can play. Park shelter building. And then the other component that's really hard is the banks are very, they often need repair, and so there'd be some stream and bankside restorations along as some woodland and wetland restoration. And this corridor really includes Central and Moir Park. And so it's that stretch between there, and it is as I said before, one of the few cities to actually make an investment in natural resources at this level. So it's a really big number, and that is a $20 million project. And I'm going to pause for just a second because while these are proposed ideas, and this is the dollar amounts that were there, there is still ample opportunity for Bloomington residents to shape what's in these amenities or what's in these facilities. So there is not a crisp plan that you could see for each of them because oftentimes when we're planning ahead, you don't want to spend too much money planning something unless you know you have the money to deliver it. And so we're caught in this middle that we have really good ideas and we have a kind of a sense of what we would like to have, but when it comes down to what color are the chairs going to be in the building, we don't know that yet. So there's opportunities to say, what are the things that you would want in a community health and wellness center? What kind of park amenities would you want to see in Moir Park and the 9 Mile corridor? The Community Center Task Force was studied the current facility and recommended this back in 2016. So sometimes these conversations take a decade or more. And so the opportunity for feedback is real. In fact, we'll know a lot more on November 8th when we know if we're going to have one project or two projects or no projects. We don't actually know. But we do know that resident participation, hearing from the residents, hearing from business owners, hearing from people who live and work in Bloomington is going to be a really important part. We'd encourage you to vote. We can vote November 7th. Or actually, you can start voting now in Civic Plaza, where you're more than welcome. We've got a fully functioning voting center in our lobby right outside of the Performing Arts Center. The other thing we have is bloomingtonforward.org is a city's website that you can come and get information around all of these pieces. There's frequently asked questions, there's pictures of the renderings that we have, and it really tries to give a clear sense of the information that's out there. Right? This is ultimately not a question of there's not an advocacy to support. This is really just information of here's what we're trying to do and here's how we propose to do it, and ultimately the voters will have the final say. And so really there's really 3 ballot questions, so you get a chance to vote on each of them independently. So if you love hockey and you don't want to do anything else, you've got an opportunity. If you love the environment and you don't want to do the other 2, that's up to you. So really each individual will be able to vote on each of the items. If all 3 questions are approved, the local sales tax would provide $155 million in money over 20 years. So tax money would come in and you would bond over it over time. Interestingly, the sales tax rate would be the same, but if you did one project, it would just last fewer years. So say it was only one project, the tax would be on for less. So if it's all 3, it's 20 years. If it's only one, it would be shorter time frame, but the same amount. And as I said, the city council concluded that the sales tax was probably the smart financial choice because nearly 66% of the revenue, I think it's 65.4, I think was the most recent number. 65% of those renovations will be paid for people who are outside of Bloomington. When you think about all the people who shop, right? There's a small mall in the east side of the city that would contribute significantly. The people who shop there, right? I grew up in Richfield next door. My family shopped in Bloomington because that's where all the stuff was. So these are monies that would be paid for people outside of Bloomington, and so that investment then is transferred to people who are outside of Bloomington. And a little known fact, someone in every county in Minnesota, all 87 counties, drives through Bloomington every day. Now, many of them are on 494, but we still count them as coming through Bloomington. And a lot of those folks are stopping off, buying gas, stopping at the stores, and shopping. And so somebody in every county in Minnesota is in our community, and they're spending dollars. And it would be an opportunity to collect some of those dollars to make investments that Bloomington residents would benefit from. As I shared, we did the pie chart at 65 and 35. And this is unlike a property tax increase. This can be spread out across residents and non-residents. Just by math, non-residents would contribute about $93 million to pay for Bloomington Forward Plan. That also includes the cost of borrowing money. But this is really, we've seen 81 other cities in the state have actually done a model like this, where they ask people from outside to do a sales tax. It's pretty common, and there's the reason why I talked about some of the savings. This is the cost of, the average cost of a half-cent sales tax would be about $85 on a Bloomington household. That's about $7 a month. That's what a typical Bloomington resident spends in Bloomington, that was that cost of that half-cent sales tax. If it were shifted to the property tax, that price would be $230 a year, or about $19.17 a month. So there is this ability to shift the burden, because all of these amenities that we've just outlined, the Community Health and Wellness Center, the ice arena, Bloomington Ice Garden, and 9 Mile Creek, are all regional benefits. These are people come from all over to kind of walk through walk through the trails, play hockey in those rinks. They could use the community center as well. And so this transfer of risk in terms of the cost, I think is there's a benefit to it rather than putting it solely on the property taxpayer. So how does it work? Well, the first one is the local sales tax is applied to all the same goods that you currently pay a sales tax on. So, and if it's approved, the sales tax would go from 7.525% to 8.025%. And so, for example, a $10 purchase would cost an extra nickel for that. And so the revenue would pay down bonds, so we would borrow money, and it'll function a little bit like a mortgage, right? You take out some money and you pay it back over time. The sales tax cannot be extended, so beyond for any other project. And so it can only apply to these three things because it's specific to the legislation, so you can't change your mind 5 years from now and go fund something else. It has to be for these very specific things. And as I noted, right, there's sales tax exemptions for groceries, for clothing, prescription, and over-the-counter drugs, feminine hygiene products, baby products, and cars. So they would be exempt from that sales tax. You want me to go back? Oh, I'm sorry. I got the wrong chart.
And so there were two actually taxes that were added in the legislature this year, and that was that metro area sales and use tax for housing that's 0.25%, and then the metro area transportation sales and use tax, 0.25%. So that's why.
Thank you. Thanks, Diane. I appreciate that. It's always good to travel with the person who helped make the slide deck. Thank you, Diane. So as I shared, so if one or more of these questions passes, so what's next? So it's November 8th and it's successful. Really, the community is then engaged in the projects about what that would look like. We would start to entertain architectural engineering firms to help start to design and planning. And if it's the Bloomington Ice Garden project, because there's so much engineering work that's already been done, we could start before the end of 2024. That's the soonest we could start for construction. Some of the other projects might be later on because the planning is so early in the stages, but really is we expect to begin right away yet this year if it's approved. If the three questions do not pass, I think the City Council has a much more difficult job in trying to figure out priorities. But so we would talk to residents again about what that re-engagement looks like. We could explore other ways to fund it. I happen to work with the budget team quite a bit, and so I would suspect that the Bloomington Ice Garden, we would really emphasize the refrigeration and try to make the roof last a few more years longer, and so we would have a potentially smaller project. We're trying to explore the best way to do that. But overall, I think you would see slower implementation, potentially smaller scale projects. And then the other thing we do know is that we'd probably incur some higher costs because of inefficiencies at the current facilities. They're just they're more expensive to run. If we actually had a leak in the refrigerant system 3 weeks ago, I had to go out and buy new recycled R22 and try to get the rinks cold because there's a lot of teams that are gearing up for practice as we enter the peak of the hockey season. People play year-round, but now we're getting into the peak where high school teams are forming. And as I shared, this is really an opportunity for people to have their voice. And so you can go into Civic Plaza beginning now. It's open, started out last Friday. And you can vote early in person at Civic Plaza between now and in November 6th at Bloomington Civic Plaza. They are open traditional business hours, 8 to 4:30. You can also vote by mail, absentee ballot, through the Secretary of State's website, and those are begin being mailed out last Friday. They started, and so you can request those and vote by mail, sort of it's the more traditional approach for absentee. And then you can always do voting in person at your local polling place. And so if you've had the Bloomington briefing, you have an election mailer in your mailbox that talks about where your voting location is and what's on the ballot, and so you can use all of those tools. And so what I would say is if you have more information, you can go to bloomingtonmn.gov/vote, or you can always go to bloomingtonforward.org to get more information on how to do that. And that was my last little pitch here. To really talk about, if you want to learn more details about the project, if you want to ask a frequently asked question, you can talk about some of the cost and tax implications are all spelled out in that. Where to vote, frequently asked questions, and this really is the official project website for these projects, and we'll update them regularly. In fact, they've probably changed yet this week. So I will have questions. I've got
Go ahead.
3. Go ahead.
Start over here.
I'll go over there and I'll work sideways.
So I'm curious whether other organizations like the hockey boosters and those kind of things are also pitching in to have this done, or?
They are, as a matter of fact. So this is not something that we can campaign for. It's just information pieces. But I think we do have the full support of the hockey associations. They were eager to stand by and support it, and so. What they're doing is they're doing it on their end privately, but they've all been supportive vocally about the projects. Yes?
I have sort of a three-headed question on the community center. I think the other two are kind of self-explanatory or well explained by your slides. My questions are on location, scope, and cost. Location, just where or if not, how to get to where. Scope is like when you have the community input, which I think is really a good idea and vital, will it kind of have dollars attached to each option and stuff, like if there is a pickleball, which wasn't there. And then the third one kind of ties in with that, because when I last saw some numbers, and I swear it said like the community center, which everybody thinks needs to be replaced, was 75 million without aquatics and 150 million with aquatics, and we're up to 102.2. So did the numbers change, or is my recollection wrong? And how much does the aquatics option add? And finally on that one, like with the hockey rink, is there going to be a user cost type associated with it to pay for the lifeguards, at least the ongoing cost, or is that going to be an additional ongoing burden on the city?
I will try to answer them in the order that you asked them. I took notes. So location is the Creekside Community Center location, 98th and Penn. That's the only site being considered. In terms of scope, we have, there's a architecture firm called HGA, and they worked a couple of years ago to create sort of a small, a medium, and a large option. The city landed on the medium option. With regard to aquatics or not, I think there were some dollars associated with that. The question becomes is, do you have a splash pad or do you have a pool? And that choice, you know, a splash pad is a little, right, my little kids would have just loved it, and that's what they did. They weren't swimmers, they were splashers. And so we haven't made the decision yet about what type of aquatics we would have, because there's an entire market for aquatic facilities. And so the question becomes, to your fourth point, which is how much is the ongoing cost? And that one is, at this point, unclear. We would expect it to go up a little bit, but if you have people at Creekside already and they move into the new building, there's no increase there. But if you do have an Olympics, I'm not saying Olympic size, but if you have a pool, you're going to need more lifeguards. And so there's going to be some incremental costs, and that will all be built out when we do the assessment of what's in there. Yeah, potentially with user fees. I think in the city of Plymouth, they do they partner with Lifetime and then give the residents a discount. So we'll figure out the mechanics of how that would work. The other thing is we would probably increase the fee at the Ice Garden for teams, because it's just going to be hopefully used more with 3 rinks of the same size. I had a question here and then a question there.
I've got a quick one, kind of. Thank you for doing that.
Long one.
There was a study done by the university regarding health statistics, and I'm not sure if you mentioned that. I was waiting to. The university gave them that 60-some% of
65
the funding would be from outside, and this is important for these people.
Yep. So the University of Minnesota Extension Office, with their team of economists that do economic development, they did an assessment of all the sales purchases in Bloomington, and that's how they arrived at the number that 65% would be paid for by people who live outside of Bloomington. Thank you. Yes, sir.
All three projects seem very worthwhile, but was there any consideration at any time to lawn golf course bunkers?
No, it's actually a really, so, so the city of Bloomington did go to the legislature the previous session and actually asked for an upgrade to the Dwan Clubhouse. Because if you've been there, it's smaller and it doesn't quite meet the needs. And the legislators were very clear that said, we don't do golf courses. And we listened very carefully and said, okay, we won't bring a golf course back. But we did approach them with that idea because Dwan is a gem and it has probably the most rounds played of any golf course in the region, aside from maybe Bunker Hills and Coon Rapids. If you could convince the tax chair to change her mind, I would be open to it, but they didn't seem interested. So appreciate that. The gentleman next to you and then you.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I support this whole thing. All of those things that you have there. As a former member of the Board of Health, I can tell you that our current health department is neither adequate nor is it welcome. And the new project started which is a big buck. We had this concrete wall. We moved it to about 3,500. And a lot of health department customers had to come from east of 35. And there's a very serious lack of process over that aggressive fluid. So we have two things. We got a heck of a lot of need on the east side, and there's not a red cent spent there. There ought to be a way to at least on that one.
No, I appreciate that, and it's something that we think about quite a bit, about how do we get that connection east and west so people can get the services that will be over there. So.
And Paul, you get the last question, and Michael, I'm assuming, can stay around and answer individual questions.
My question is, I'm also in favor of everything, but that's, your funding is all for the construction and the renovation. Mm-hmm. What about the ongoing maintenance? Because usually when you build something new, it's going to take more energy, it's going to take more heating, it's going to take a lot of other things. Where does that money going to be coming from to support the ongoing maintenance?
So the short answer is we don't have a pro forma or sort of a business plan for each of those components. We do know that the ice arena energy use, we believe it will actually go down because it's the older system, just the generator is just running permanently. And so we think in the ice garden, it'll actually be a lower maintenance cost because it'll be the same size footprint, just more efficient. With regard to the Community Health and Wellness Center, we think eliminating the public health building space, that will save us some money. We'll also be able to put some of the park staff over there. So the short answer is I can't give you a precise number, but I can tell you that it's something that we think about. If you think about rec programming, it's a mix of a couple of things. It's people who, annual fees or pay for service, some property tax support, and then some outside use. And what we'll try to do is find the right balance between those three sources to make sure that it's not adding, but it's actually something that people value. But we worry about all the time.
I just want to thank Michael for being here, and thank you for sticking around for a few more questions if people have them. And as somebody in the room said, get out and vote. And if you have more questions, go to the website, and we have some experts in our Rotary Club that can also help answer your questions. Thanks so much for being here, Michael. And with that, have a great couple weeks.